Okay, we're back with part 3 of the live online Yuri panel. We've got a couple of questions from the audience watching. A couple of just two pick questions, but if you have any more, of course, you can email them to me at yuricon@gmail.com. Put them in the comments for the video when we post these on YouTube, or you can always reach me at my blog, okazu, okazu.blogspot.com. So here we go. Adam asks whether we think we're likely to see more explicit lesbian identity in manga as time goes by, and whether that's a positive result of Western influence going back the other way. That's a really great question, Adam. Thank you for asking it. We already are seeing more explicit lesbian identity. As I mentioned in the last couple of questions, we have a couple of artists who work for Yuri Hime and a number of other publishers who are really working to make that more explicit. The word lesbian for a Japanese person is really not so much a discussion of their sexual identity, but of their social and political identity. So it's a little different than the way we use it here. It's very rare for a person to say, I am a lesbian in Japan, because it makes a social statement. It means I am not going to be following the rules of society. I'm not going to be following what my family expects of me. And for many, many, many people there, it means I'm never going to have children or a real family. So there is a difference with the way they use it. But we do see some increasing lesbian identity in manga. I'm going to refer again to Takamiya Jin, who just recently put out 3 books. Seasons was the one that I voted the best Yuri of 2011. And the reason I voted it that was because we saw some lesbian slang within the context of her stories. Her characters were overtly lesbian, and that's still pretty unusual. When you look at something like Nishi Uko's Collectors that runs in Rockwind Le Paradis, you see a longtime couple. The word lesbian is entirely irrelevant for them. They're clearly a couple, and it's really a very beautiful, very adult story. A number of you have mentioned Aoi Hana in the comments. If any of you have read up to the 6th volume of the manga, you know that the conversation that Fumi has with her friends, "Are you that way?" actually happens. That's something that we never saw before. It's something relatively new in Yuri manga. Up till very, very recently, I would personally define Yuri manga quite often as lesbian content without lesbian identity. But that is starting to change. You're starting to see characters who either overtly identify as lesbian, or where it's not relevant, are just clearly lesbian in the sense that there's no coming out involved, they're in a long-term relationship, or they're just totally comfortable with themselves and their lives, and that's really, really different and kind of spectacular. The second question we got was from MJ Vito, who asks, does the interpretation of acceptance of lesbian relationships as portrayed in the recent real life Yuri mirror what happens in Japan today? Let's take the story of Girlfriends for a moment, because I think that's a relatively realistic story. It's about 2 girls. It takes place in school, which makes it, sort of a kind. It's what I call the generic story A, girl meets girl, girl likes other girl. And usually in story A, it means the end. But in Girlfriends, we actually have 5 volumes of the 2 characters figuring out their lives. And they have a very, very happily ever after sort of ending. It's a great story, and I highly recommend you read it. And to some extent, it's actually very realistic. But does it mirror real relationships? Well, in the case of Girlfriends, I actually say yes. If you're in high school. If you're an adult, things are a little different, and I'm sure those of you who are adult watching can understand that. So real relationships in lesbian relationships in any country, not just Japan, are very complex. There are very few countries so far that have laws that allow lesbian couples to make a legal family without jumping through hoops and writing up ridiculous documents that no married couple would ever have to get. So there is a difference with the way a lesbian relationship looks. It's nice to have a happily ever after ending, but there's more to do than just happily ever after. And anyone who's in a real relationship knows that. So am I glad that those happily ever after endings exist? Absolutely. We're always glad to see happily ever afters. But those of us who have to actually live in the ever after knows that there's more to it than that. So they don't quite mirror the full complexity of life. But after all, it's just a comic book. So that's really not all that surprising. That concludes part 3, and we're going to come back for last part 4 in just a moment.